We are big Stephen King fans, and since The Monkey just came out, we decided, hey, we like Stephen King, we like lists, so let's create a top three favorite Stephen King adaptations that are either overlooked or underrated. And it could be a movie, could be a miniseries, could be a TV show. Drew, this is one of those that I think you and I eat, sleep, and breathe Stephen King stories so much that I talk like his characters every now and then. So I'm curious to see what you got cooking.
It was tough to narrow this down because I got the list down to six. Number three, it started in May in a small town, and every month after that, whenever the moon was full, it came
Oh,
back. I'm talking about
oof.
Silver Bullet. Fun,
Wow.
campy, effective werewolf story. Some work, some really good work, I think, from Corey Haim, Everett McGill,
Hmm.
and then Gary Busey, everyone's favorite drunk uncle.
The
He's
Buse.
the uncle's fun too because he doesn't necessarily believe what's going on around him, but he helps his nephew. I just think there's something sweet to that character, and there's just like this cozy feel to this movie that makes me want to watch it every October. Now you mentioned we can do movies, we can do miniseries, and my number two is a miniseries that came out in February of 1999 on ABC. It's called Storm of the Century. This is a horror drama that King wrote as an
Hmm.
original miniseries for ABC. This was a big 3 night event, and I remember very clearly watching this with my mom as it aired.
Hmm.
We were so excited every night to see where it would go. This is all the ingredients of what makes, I think, King's work so good, including this big group of characters and then a great villain. In this case, it's
Yeah.
Andre Lenoge, who, as a kid watching this thing, scared the hell out of me. And there's this incredible epilogue that feels like an absolute gut punch when it's all over.
Hmm.
I zipped through this a winter or two ago. I hadn't seen it since it first aired, and it was nice and cold out. And I'm like, this would be perfect. I haven't seen this in so long, and it 100% still delivers. This is where we might have a little bit of controversy. My number one is John Carpenter's Christine. Obviously, well known adaptation because of Carpenter's involvement. My argument is if you gathered strangers on the street and you just say, hey, write down your three favorite Stephen King adaptations, this is not going to be on a lot of people's
Hmm.
list. It is brisk, but it is a fairly faithful adaptation of the book. And then you have all of the John Carpenter trademarks that we love. And I think blending those two minds of Carpenter and King and they're kind of this shared love that they have of oldies teenage culture. It just works.
Not only one of the best Carpenter films, one of the best adaptations from Stephen King, period, but it's also an incredible story. Like you said, it hits all the right notes for high school drama and angst, coming of age, and also just a freaking terrifying story and just like premise and a banger. I mean, we don't need to talk about Carpenter's music, but freaking banger songs in this. A soundtrack is just incredible. So, no, that gets a pass in my book, 100%.
And this is the same with the Dead Zone, where it's like well known, but again, it's not going to be someone's in most
Yep.
people's either top tier list or top three, and I think that's why it qualifies.
Every year, that's a watch for me. Christine, it's always there. I have my number three been thinking about this story a lot. Now, I have not read the Mr. Mercedes series, but I would argue this show or limited series is something, and it's not Mr. Mercedes, something that's been on my mind a lot. And I'd love to return to this and see where some of these characters are. And it's the HBO limited series, The Outsider, released in 2020. This show is great because we've got Jason Bateman starring in this. We got Cynthia Erivo as Holly Gibney in this. Fantastic job as that character. And we've got Ben Mendelsohn, who I love seeing all the time. This is something that this every now and then I think back to this limited series and I'm like, you know what? I think that is a very underrated show, not often talked about. Number two, this is my controversial pick because I would argue this is my favorite King story, period. Hands down. This, every time I reread this, and the first time I read it, by the end of it, I'm sobbing like a baby. And that is the 1999 film released by Frank Darabont, The Green Mile. And I did some digging. This is where I'm like, I don't know if I can include The Green Mile. But I kept coming across various articles, one from Slash Film saying, why is it that The Green Mile is such an underappreciated film, not only from Stephen King, but of Frank Darabont? This is something where we have such an incredible cast. We've got Tom Hanks. This is where we get Michael Clark Duncan, who's discovered in this movie. This shot him up into becoming one of the most, until he passed away, one of the most interesting character actors, if you will. We've got a young Sammy Rockwell who's just a raging lunatic in this and does a fantastic job. And the story is, bar none, one of the best stories, one of my favorite stories of all time. My number one is a tie to the hat that I'm wearing right now. It is the sequel to The Shining, the 2019 film Doctor Sleep, released by Mike Flanagan. Doctor Sleep, I would argue, is one of the best horror movies released in the last 10 years, maybe, that it does two things, and I think it's meant to satisfy fans of those two different categories. One, satisfy those who love The Shining, the movie, and one, those that love the book. But I never realized I wanted to see what would happen to Danny whenever he's grown up. But then you start thinking, that's got to mess up a kid. I mean, the psychological damage, even though he's gifted, does that mean anything if he's gone through such a traumatic experience? And the fact that we get also a terrifying group led by none other than Rose the Hat or Rebecca Ferguson, in which maybe my favorite role of hers, she is sexy and freaking terrifying at the same time. Like, I've said this before, but I'd let her suck my soul right from my body because she is just one of those that could seduce me. And I'm like, sure, whatever, Rose. I got this gift, but you can have it. I also love the idea of Danny. What does he use his gifts for? And it's later in life. And then who do we become later in life? I love that kind of breakdown and analysis of, we may start in this area of our lives, but then we become someone different. And then Danny leaning into his quote unquote Doctor Sleep personality. And that's also super emotional for me. And it's brought beautifully to the screen by Mike Flanagan, who has adapted a lot of King's stories. And I'd love to see more of that. Every winter, that's my go to. I got a couple: The Shining and Doctor Sleep.